Hi everybody. The local election season is kicking off, so I'm doing a bunch of interviews with the candidates. I'm starting off with the Democratic primary for U.S. Congress in District 10. Tabitha Johnson-Green is not running this time, leaving it open for someone from Athens to take a shot at it. Lexy Doherty and Jessica Fore are competing for the chance to challenge Republican Mike Collins in November. In this video, I asked them both the same questions back to back to help you decide who you'd like to vote for. First, let's meet both of the candidates briefly and then get started with Jessica Fore. Thanks so much for being here with me, Lexy.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, for having me. I'm excited to chat with you.
Thanks for joining me, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm wondering what's driving you to run for Congress for a second time, because the political climate this time around is even a little bit scary to me, even worse than it was last time.
I'm running for a lot of the same reasons that I ran last time. One is that I've been invested in this district all of my life. I was born and raised in Macon, which is outside of the district, but I've been spending time in many of the counties within the district since I was about 8 years old. Going to camp at Rock Eagle and the FHA camp in Newton County over towards Covington, coming up through the different counties of the district and spending time in Athens because my dad was Dr. Dog, so we came to Georgia games a lot. Going into Butts County for barbecue, so I've been spending a lot of time here since I was a kid, and then I've been here all but 2 years of my adult life. I came to the Athens area in '97 for school, and I've been here continuously since 2004. And as an adult, I've been heavily involved in service projects and leading youth events and church events in about 15 of the 20 counties that make up Georgia 10. So it's been a long history of caring about the well-being of the district long before getting into politics. And I felt morally compelled to step up and run because we are in such a vulnerable state in our nation's history right now. It's really not even a political conversation anymore. It's not about differing opinions about how to solve problems. It's about a particular group that is trying to seize authoritarian power and control over others. And, in many cases, they're openly advocating for doing away with democratic processes. My grandparents were World War II veterans, and I grew up learning a lot about the seeds of fascism that led to that entire situation and the need for good people to resist early. You don't wait till 1945 to say you have a problem. You look at the situation in the 20s and 30s with a despotic leader who, in that case, had a violent attempted coup of the government, was prosecuted for it, actually did some jail time in contrast to our situation, and yet was allowed back onto a ballot for a democratic election. And that was the last democratic election in Germany in 1932 until after the war. And so, when we have situations like this, I think good people have to step up, and that's why I've decided to.
Yeah, I mean, Trump is openly saying he wants to be a dictator on day one. Yep. He's, says it'll be a bloodbath if he's not elected. Yeah, this is a really, it's really scary to me that what's happening to our country for sure.
Now to Lexy Doherty, same question. What is driving you to run for Congress this year?
I've always been interested in politics, but I would say making the decision to run for office kind of happened, I would say, slowly over time, and then, all at once. So I grew up, my mom had a small business, and really most of my childhood, I was kind of running around terrorizing her in her store. And after the 2008 economic collapse, I watched as her store, just slowly over the years lost business. People just didn't have as much disposable income. And really, it was kind of a slow, painful death over a couple of years where she worked really hard to keep it going, and just eventually she just wasn't making enough to stay open. And that was a really common story in town. I watched most of the small family-owned businesses shut down over those next couple years and then reopen as kind of corporate storefronts because they were the only ones that could afford the rent. And I just watched as our representatives have my whole life done nothing but bow to their billionaire donors and corporate lobbyists, and they have done nothing to help the average working family. Then in college, I went to school for geology. And again, I saw how, decades ago, the oil and gas industry had definitive evidence that carbon dioxide was warming the atmosphere. And they spent tons of money and years burying that evidence so that, again, they could make a profit at the expense of, our futures. Now I work in education, which is in some ways very hopeful. I get to see students, think about the life they want to live and plan for their futures. And in a lot of ways, education is the great equalizer. But in all of these industries, there are people intentionally keeping the status quo. And we are just seeing over the last 50 or so years that the rich keep getting richer and the poor keep getting poorer. We just need representatives in the government who are going to fight back against that and who are going to put people over profit. Last summer, I was just doing some research on historical election data because I'm a big nerd, and I was specifically looking at this race and saw that for the last 3 or 4 cycles, we did not have a strong candidate in the general that was actually putting up a fight to win. That just really bothered me. And so I decided to start asking around and seeing who was planning to run, because from my perspective, this is a tough seat to win. And I realized that if we had any shot of winning, we needed to get to work. So when I reached out to a couple people from different areas, and at that time, the feedback that I got was that no one was planning on running. And I had kind of a, if not me, then who moment where I realized that somebody needed to step up, and I was willing and capable and ready. So I decided to, go for it.
What would be your most important policy priority in office?
So my top of the list for me is raising wages and lowering prices. People across the board are struggling to make ends meet right now. There are issues across industries with, kind of just like in small businesses and in education and and in oil. There are, businesses who are price gouging and raising their prices and not raising their employees' wages. So we are seeing this massive gap between the incomes of those at the top and the incomes of working people. The first thing I would do is raise the minimum wage. There are thousands of workers in this district that still make below $15 an hour. So that is something that we could do tomorrow that would immediately raise people's quality of life. I also think of economics as kind of a big umbrella for a lot of policies that I would pursue. I think of this as including education and job training, that we need to make sure that our workforce is prepared for the economy of tomorrow. We need to make sure that people have access to healthcare so that they are healthy enough to work. And even in this industry, we have a big agricultural community. So we need to make sure we're investing in both rural development and urban development, that we're not leaving anyone behind. And I would say a very close second priority for me is, or really maybe tied for first, is good governance, because for all of this to happen, we need everyone engaged in the government. We need everyone's voices to be heard, because there are people that benefit when some people are left out of the democratic process. So we need to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act to make sure that everyone has equal access to the ballot, and we have ballot secrecy. We need to fight gerrymandering, and we need to make sure that representatives aren't insider trading, because right now a lot of people just don't trust our government. And until we start giving them a reason to trust it, they're going to continue being disenfranchised and disillusioned, and they're going to stay at home, and things are never going to get better.
About the minimum wage, a lot of people have different numbers that they want to raise it to.
So 15 is what has kind of people have generally come around as a good next step. Actually, in Athens, the last I checked, and this was a while ago, so it's probably higher, the living wage for like a single worker was $16 an hour, over 16. So, I even think that 15 is pretty conservative, that's still for a lot of people below a living wage. And that's not even to get into some big cities where the cost of living is way higher. So that to me is like the lowest that I would say is a reasonable minimum wage. I would talk about a higher one.
Back to Jessica. What policy is most important to you?
It depends very much on how the election goes and who's president at that time and who has a majority in the House and in the Senate.
Okay, well, what if, God forbid, Trump wins? What would be your
priority? If Trump wins and I also win, and so this is a situation where I've been elected to Congress in a red district, that probably indicates that Georgia went to Biden. I'm hoping that we're still going to have enough of a Democratic resistance in the House to hold against a Trump presidency. But at that point, the priorities would very much be entirely about protecting democracy and trying to, thwart the attempt to do away with presidential term limits, for example, which I'm sure will be something that comes on the table if we have Trump. And so it's really going to be a matter of trying to ensure that we still have democratic elections in 2028. If we have a Biden presidency and we have a healthy democratic presence in both houses, and we can actually work on legislation, then I'm going to be focused on kitchen table economic issues for working people. And that encompasses a lot of stuff. That encompasses things like universal health care, living wage jobs, affordable housing, funding education. There's lots of things. Probably the prioritization of which of those I go in heaviest on is going to have a lot to do with what I'm able to learn and who I'm able to build coalitions with as a freshman member of Congress. But I imagine I'll be going in with some sway, having flipped a red district. So.
True.
Yeah.
So it sounds like kitchen table issues, sort of like economics for like the everyday working people would be your priority. Is that correct?
We've got to create an economy that is favoring the working class instead of the billionaire class. Wealth doesn't trickle down from the billionaires to the working people. It trickles up from the working people to the corporations. And there's plenty of pie to go around, but we need to create a better reward system for working people and give regular Americans some hope in life.
Now I'd like to turn to a different issue. I think it's one of the most important that we're really going to see this year, which is about abortion. So the Supreme Court, of course, has struck down Roe v. Wade, and we are seeing women being prosecuted, not just for having abortions even, but also for having miscarriages.
Yep.
So what would you like to see done on a national level on the issue of reproductive rights?
Yeah, I appreciate you making the point that of people getting prosecuted when they're dealing with miscarriage situations, because if you place a law or a restriction of any kind around reproductive health care, then there has to be a mechanism to enforce the law, which means there has to be a mechanism for a civil or criminal inquiry anytime somebody was pregnant and now they're not anymore. And the majority of those situations do involve miscarriages, and they do involve terrible medical situations. I think what needs to happen on a national level, I think that the argumentation behind Roe was flawed, which is one of the reasons that Roe was able to be overturned. I think that we need to codify bodily autonomy in federal law. It's a difficult, complex subject. I will say that personally, not legally, but personally, spiritually, morally, I'm deeply opposed, certainly, to late-term elective abortions. But from a legal standpoint, from a constitutional standpoint, and looking at the implications of different legal approaches to the issue, it's clear to me that the Democratic approach to abortion policy, which is that we're going to allow it to be legal. We're not going to have the government intervene in healthcare decisions between women and their doctors, but we do want healthcare access. We want birth control and sex education so that people can be equipped to prevent unplanned pregnancies. But that actually results in far fewer unplanned pregnancies and far fewer abortions than the Republican approach, which says, hey, let's look at a fertilized egg as a person with human rights. The thing that flows from that approach to to policy means that you have to be consistent, make illegal some of the most effective forms of birth control, like the IUD, even arguably hormonal forms of birth control that may have a backup effect of expelling a fertilized egg. And then when you remand the issue of abortion to the states, what you do is you get a lot of unplanned pregnancies in red states, and then you have people who have to delay and cross state lines to obtain a procedure at a much later stage of pregnancy that more Americans would find objectionable. You see what I mean? And so yeah, I'm philosophically very pro-life. I think that the legal approach to that is prevention, and I don't trust politicians to get in the middle of healthcare decisions, especially when we're dealing with situations now where, in the real world on the ground, whatever politicians legislate as a law, there's then the problem of healthcare providers having to figure out how to interpret that, and that getting in the way of patient care. For example, in the state of Georgia, and I believe also in Texas and some other red states, they've issued heartbeat bills, which is a misnomer. They're talking about fetal pole cardiac activity before there is a heart structure developing at a very, very early stage. And a lot of them will have exceptions for if the mother's life is in danger. But there have been problems where you have a woman who is pretty far along in her pregnancy, and then she has a terrible situation arise, like a placental rupture, where the pregnancy is not going to be viable, the baby can't be saved, and if it's left to play out on its own, there's a high likelihood of the mother becoming septic and going into shock and dying, but that may take a couple of weeks. And so the healthcare provider is left having to interpret, can I intervene here and deliver the baby and provide palliative care and do what I can for this family? Or am I not allowed to do that? Will I be prosecuted for doing that because the vital signs are not crashing yet? And to err on the side of caution and avoid being sued, going to jail, or losing their practice, they're having to advise patients, hey, you're going to need to go to a blue state to get the health care that you need. And we're going to hope for the best. We're going to hope that you stay stable until you're able to do that. That's unacceptable.
Lexy's up next on the topic of reproductive rights.
I don't think that we can say we live in a free country if we do not have the freedom to make decisions about our own bodies. And this, to me, should just be a fundamental human right. I also see this as being just a piece of a much larger issue of healthcare access. For example, in District 10, there are 8 counties that don't have an OBGYN. So that's 8 counties where women don't have preventative healthcare. They, just every day, but not to mention if they are pregnant, they're not having easy access to that prenatal care that's so fundamental for a healthy pregnancy. To take it further, it's directly related to our maternal mortality rate, which is, towards the top in the country. And I think we also have to acknowledge that for Black women, it's almost 4 times as high than it is for white women. It's such an issue, and we need to be talking about expanding access, making sure that people everywhere have preventative care, that they have access to the services they need, that we are not forcing women to have pregnancies that we know won't be healthy. And so at the federal level, I would like to see long-term a constitutional amendment that protects healthcare access and healthcare secrecy, because the government should have no say in what anyone does with their healthcare. People should be able to make their own decisions about their bodies. I do understand that we're probably a long way off from having the votes to actually do that. But right now, what we can do is codify the rights that were protected by Roe. And to do that, we need to win back the House. And we need to hold the Senate and hold the White House. That puts this race right in the thick of this election, because this is a seat that we could flip and win back the House. A lot of people feel like their vote doesn't matter, and turning out, you're just one of millions of people. But this is a district where if you care about this issue, if you get organized and we flip this district, that we can protect the rights of women across the country.
I try not to shy away from the controversial topics. So now I want to talk about Gaza, which of course is another huge issue. Over 30,000 people have been killed there since the war started, mostly women and children. Starvation, disease are spreading. Almost the entire population there is homeless. The International Court of Justice ruled that Israel is plausibly committing a genocide. And of course, the U.S. has been there every step of the way, providing arms and assistance. So I'm wondering what your take on it is. Would you vote to condition aid to Israel on respect for human rights?
I think the concern that people feel about this conflict is incredibly valid. And I think it also speaks to a much larger concern about the US's place in international politics and where we support certain regimes. And it gets extra complicated in this case because we're tying politics and history to religion. So people feel very passionately about it. And I think it's totally valid that people have, really intense beliefs and different opinions on this topic. But for me, it's a part of a much bigger issue of our place in international politics. I think that it should be our standard to condition aid on human rights and access to humanitarian aid. And I would like to see this be a standard for any aid we give internationally. I would like to see that be just a standard policy so that in the next conflict, we don't have to get into the weeds of, why it's right or wrong for this specific case to condition aid. Because I don't want my money going towards bombs that are killing civilians, period.
Jessica, how about you? Would you condition aid to Israel on respect for human rights?
The short answer to that is yes. The longer answer is I think that ship has sailed. I think that Netanyahu has demonstrated that he doesn't care about human rights in Gaza. The situation over there, it's in some ways morally straightforward and logistically complex. From the moral straightforward standpoint, it's, militarized violence against civilians, targeting civilians, or indiscriminately allowing civilians to be harmed in a military action. That's a war crime or a terrorist act, depending on the circumstances. Hamas's terrorism against Israel on October 7th was heinous. And political Israel's response to Hamas in Gaza has been heinous with a much higher casualty rate since then. To me, a significant part of the problem is abusers of power, pathological abusers, who have access to all of the firepower and are each targeting civilians on the other side. I view it almost more as a situation involving layers of organized crime that's militarized than a military war per se. And so then the question becomes, what sort of U.S. foreign policy response can we have that addresses that protects human rights without starting World War III? And that's something that Nobel laureates have been working on for decades and know a lot more about than I do. I'm sitting down with military experts and retired colonels out of the Marine Corps and different folks to ask questions and help shape my thinking about, okay, how do we do it? How do we protect civilians and prosecute war criminals and terrorists? Because you can't just say, well, Hamas is using people as human shields, so all shucks, we'll just go bomb everyone and just carpet bomb them off of the face of the earth. That's not working. And that's not who we are as a country, and that's not what we should be supporting as a response.
Yeah, and it's not even working to free the hostages either, because the only time they really got hostages freed was when they had that temporary ceasefire.
Yeah.
So I'm definitely happy to talk with you today because I myself am an undecided voter in this race. So I'm just wondering, why should voters, including myself, choose you over your opponent?
Well, first of all, I will say, we were talking about this earlier, I think my opponent is lovely. I think that she is bright and sincere, and I'm sure that her family is really proud of her, and they should be. The stuff that I'm going to say about why you should vote for me isn't about anything negative about any other Democrats. It's just the political reality of the district. Vote for me because I'm the only one that the Republicans are worried about really making a dent in Mike Collins's following and potential votes for the fall. It doesn't work to go and just knock on a random Republican's door if you're a Democrat and try to get him to vote for you. That isn't going to work.
Right.
And so the conditions that are necessary to persuade people who aren't already planning to vote for you are as follows. One, early contact, not right before the election canvassing, but you've got to be in touch with them and kind of doing that persuasion campaign a lot earlier than the point of sending out canvassing teams. Two is you've got to make an effort to identify voters that are persuadable. You can't just go knock on random Trump supporting doors and think that you're going to get anywhere in a short conversation. And the third thing is you've got to have an opponent with extremely unpopular positions. And so I think we're there. We've got Mike Collins with extreme positions on, supporting Trump no matter what, even if he tries to overthrow democracy, being completely opposed to any restrictions on guns, any red flag laws to prevent mass shootings.
Why are you the one to be able to convince the independents and maybe even some Republicans to get out and vote for you?
Yeah. One reason is because I already have a good reputation in the district in those circles. Because I've been an evangelical Christian worship leader all over the district, going and doing traveling church events and things like that for 25 years. I've been going and playing in a lot of United Methodist churches. The North Georgia Conference of the United Methodist Church is the largest in the world, and so I'm deeply networked into that entire group of churches. I'm also nationally known for abuse victim advocacy in the Presbyterian Church in America, which is headquartered in Lawrenceville. Part of Gwinnett County is also in District 10. And I forced the issue of abuse and domestic violence to the floor of their General Assembly with powerful people trying to shut me up throughout that process. And so there's already people who kind of know me through ministry work and things kind of in more conservative circles, where there's a level of trust to be able to go and speak to them and to be able to go and talk to them about issues from their perspective. Something like the abortion debate, you're never going to persuade a Republican or conservative by saying my body, my choice, because from their perspective, it's not about your body, it's about the fetus's body, right? You've got to be able to talk with them about lowering the abortion rate through prevention, which is something that they can get on board with too. You've got to talk with them about things like, a lot of them will disagree about whether or not it's okay to get an IUD or go on the pill, but they still want to have that choice. A lot of them may disagree with whether it's okay to get in vitro fertilization, but they want to have that choice. Those are the kinds of areas where you can have persuasive conversations if you're equipped to do it.
Okay, Lexy, this is the big one. Why should voters choose you over your opponent?
Because we can win. I think this is obviously a really tough race to win. We are very gerrymandered. We've had a long history of Republicans easily winning this seat. And to change that, it's, going to take a big effort. And I'm really proud of the campaign that we've run so far. There's kind of two pieces that I think are really important to actually win this race. And the first part is building coalitions. And that's something that from day one has been a big priority of mine. I think of the Democratic Party as being the big tent party. And, even within the party, we have a lot of really diverse opinions. There's a lot of stuff we disagree on, and we still come together and make a decision and get the job done. And I think in this case, flipping this seat is going to take expanding that coalition further. There's a lot of people that I've talked to that are just totally sick of politics as it is today. They think that none of their representatives care about them. They think that everybody's in it for the money, and they're just so sick of the circus. So I think we need to kind of change from just this negative partisanship, pointing fingers, laying blame, and start to build a coalition of people working towards a positive future. And I've actually been kind of surprised and think it's funny that I'm pretty progressive, but I actually have a Republican and a Libertarian that are on the campaign with me. And for when they both said that they wanted to work with me, one of my first questions was, what made you decide to come with me? They answered very similarly, and they kind of made the point that I just did, that they're so sick of the way politics looks right now, and they just want a representative that they believe will work for their best interest and put doing the right thing over partisanship. That's what it's going to take to win this race. And the second piece of it is that we need to organize. There's no substitute for an organized race and getting out and talking to people. I'm really proud of what we've done so far. We've got over 20 people on the team. I've got organizers across the district. And every day we have more volunteers and interns and staff that want to join the campaign. And that's what it's going to take to win this race. And I'm really excited about the work that we've done so far and the community that we've already started to build. And, it's only up from here.
Awesome. Well, there are so many things that I would like to ask you, but is there anything that you would like to talk about that we haven't gotten to yet?
Sure. So I've talked a lot about kind of building coalitions across the district to get elected, but something that's also equally important to me is what comes after we're elected. And I'm running for a seat in the federal government, but I think it's just as important to pay attention to state and local politics. As a member of the Greenway Commission, I am very involved with how the local government works and, getting policies passed here and infrastructure built. And I think that's such an important piece of being a federal representative, because we would pass all sorts of funding bills, and a lot of that money goes to state and local governments to actually get things done. And so congressional representative, as kind of a regional liaison, is in a really unique position to kind of be the between state and local governments and the federal government. All of that federal money, if state or local representatives don't know how to apply for bills, don't know what the bills can go for, don't know how to, go through the process of actually building what they're getting the funding for, that money is practically worthless. So
yeah, and Athens, I think, is pretty good at applying for that stuff, but this might be really helpful for some of the more outlying areas, I feel.
Yeah, I talked with some people up in Madison County, and they said their commissioners are begging for help, asking for infrastructure money, because they just, there's a lot of people that get represented or that get elected that aren't a part of government before that. They don't know kind of the nuts and bolts of the process. So they are really struggling to access this money for expanding broadband and expanding their sewage systems. So I wouldn't just focus on Athens, even though I love Athens, this is where I live. It's going to be just as important to me to work with other communities across the district, many of which are, small towns run by mainly conservatives. And I will be just as thrilled to work with those governments as I would be any other government, because to me, the whole point of running for this seat is making people's lives better.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for talking with me.
Thanks, Chris. It was nice to chat with you.
Final question. Jessica, are there any other important issues you'd like to talk about?
Depends on how much time we have. Yeah. Let's see. If I was going to be a big nerd about just something that is just a personal bee in the bonnet, I think this could have bipartisan support. I think that we need a national lane discipline initiative for the sake of alleviating traffic, alleviating fatalities, and saving the environment by lowering emissions. If you look at countries like Germany, or places that have really good passing lane enforcement, they have much lower rates of traffic jams and preventable car accidents from lane changing. And it's something that is already on the books as a law in every state in one form or another, but there's limited enforcement. And so in Georgia, for example, the law is that if you're in the left lane and somebody approaches from behind, you're required to immediately get out of the left lane and yield it for people who are trying to pass. But it's very rarely enforced. And so the result is we travel in these bumper-to-bumper high-speed wads with sort of limited speed enforcement, and then somebody gets a text message or somebody blows out a tire, and then there's a giant pileup, right? And so you've got injuries, you've got deaths, you've got property damage, you've got the entire law enforcement response coming out to deal with that, and you've got a bunch of people idling in traffic with high emissions. I think that we need to look at that and have some sort of cohesive policy through the FHA and the funds that they offer to states for enforcement to ramp up enforcement on that so that our roads flow more freely, and so that we can cut down on so many of those preventable tragedies.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That sounds great. Well, thanks so much for being here with me today.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening. What I'm wondering is, can't we send them both to Congress? How am I going to pick? Either way, this is a good problem to have. Next interview will be with the candidates for sheriff. In the meantime, I hope you get a chance to enjoy this wonderful spring weather. I'll see you next time.